The coffee cup trembles in Jake Morrison's hands as images flood his mind orange flames. Desperate screams, a child's teddy bear on a smoky stairwell. The rookie firefighter sees it all. Apartment 4B, the elderly woman by the window, the young family trapped on the third floor. His vision blurs as sirens wail in the distance, but the station is quiet. Too quiet. The premonition feels like ice in his veins, yet he knows the fire hasn't started yet. The autumn morning in downtown Chicago carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves mixed with exhaust fumes from the busy intersection outside Station 19. Jake Morrison sat at his desk, fingers still wrapped around the now cold coffee mug, his knuckles white with tension. The vision had been so vivid, so real, he could still smell the acrid smoke, hear the panicked voices echoing through narrow hallways. "Hey, rookie, you look like you've seen a ghost," called out Captain Rodriguez from across the room, his weathered face showing concern beneath thick gray eyebrows. The 20-year veteran had seen enough young firefighters crack under pressure to recognize the signs. Jake forced a smile, but his hands continued to shake. "Just tired, Cap. Long night." But it wasn't fatigue that plagued him. It was the certainty that somewhere in the city, death was preparing to collect its due. The apartment building from his vision stood clear in his memory. A red brick structure on Maple Street, fire escapes zigzagging down its facade like iron scars. He'd driven past it countless times during training runs, never paying it much attention until now. The radio crackled to life, dispatching units to a minor fender bender across town. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the call that would send them racing toward Maple Street, toward the inferno he'd witnessed in his mind. But the call never came. "Morrison, grab your gear," Lieutenant Barnes shouted from the apparatus floor. "We're doing building inspections today. City's been on our backs about the older residential structures." Jake's blood ran cold. "Which buildings, Lieutenant?" "Starting with the east side. Maple Street area, some complaints about faulty wiring and blocked exits." The rookie's legs felt like lead as he approached his locker, the metallic clang of equipment seeming unnaturally loud in the cavernous garage. His turnout coat hung before him like a shroud, its reflective stripes catching the harsh fluorescent light. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to claim illness, anything to avoid what felt like walking directly into fate's trap. But duty called stronger than fear. Jake Morrison had sworn an oath to protect lives, even if it meant sacrificing his own. As he pulled on his gear, the weight of it felt heavier than usual, pressing down on his shoulders like the burden of prophecy itself. The inspection truck rumbled through the narrow streets of Chicago's east side, past corner bodegas and small cafes where the aroma of fresh bread mingled with the diesel fumes. Jake sat in the passenger seat, his palms sweating despite the cool October air filtering through the partially open window. Every turn brought them closer to Maple Street, closer to the building that haunted his thoughts. Lieutenant Barnes, a compact man with salt and pepper hair and permanent worry lines, reviewed his clipboard. 15 buildings on the list today. I'll start with 428 Maple. Had 3 complaints this month about smoke detectors and a blocked rear exit. 428 Maple. The numbers hit Jake like physical blows. This was it, the building from his vision, where flames would soon dance and lives would hang in the balance. He could already see it in his mind. Mrs. Chun in 4B, barely 5 feet tall, her arthritic hands fumbling with the window latch. The Rodriguez family on the 3rd floor. Little Maria clutching her teddy bear while her parents searched desperately for an escape route. "Lieutenant," Jake's voice cracked slightly, "maybe we should start somewhere else. Work our way up to the bigger buildings." Bond shot him a curious look. "You feeling all right, Morrison? You've been jumpy all morning." Before Jake could answer, the building loomed before them, 4 stories of aging brick and corroded metal, exactly as he'd seen it. The fire escape hung precariously from the eastern wall, its bolts darkened with rust. Windows stared down like hollow eyes, some adorned with flower boxes where geraniums struggled against the urban decay. They parked at the curb, and Jake's hands trembled as he gathered his inspection equipment. The building superintendent, a heavyset man named Tony Kowalski, emerged from the ground floor entrance, keys jangling from an oversized ring clipped to his belt. "About time you guys showed up," Tony wheezed, his thick Chicago accent cutting through the street noise. "Tan's been complaining for weeks about that smoke detector on the 4th floor. Chirps all night long." Jake's throat tightened. 4th floor Mrs. Chun's apartment. In his vision, the faulty detector had been silent when the fire started, giving the elderly woman no warning as smoke seeped under her door. "We'll need to check every unit," Barnes said, making notes on his clipboard. "Fire code violations are serious business." As they entered the building, Jake's senses went into overdrive. The narrow hallway smelled of old cooking grease and musty carpet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly yellow pools on faded wallpaper. Each step up the creaking stairs felt like climbing toward his own doom, yet he couldn't turn back. His duty as a firefighter compelled him forward, even as every survival instinct screamed retreat. On the 2nd floor, a young mother peered through her door's security chain, suspicion evident in her dark eyes. "You're not here about the rent, are you?" "Fire inspection, ma'am," Barnes replied professionally. "Just making sure everyone's safe." Safe. The word felt like mockery to Jake, who could almost smell smoke that didn't yet exist, could hear screams that hadn't yet been uttered. His premonition pressed against his consciousness like a migraine, warning him that time was running out, that fate was already setting its trap. The 4th floor felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself carried the weight of impending tragedy. Jake's breathing became shallow as they approached apartment 4B, where his vision had shown Mrs. Chun trapped by flames that would soon consume everything in their path. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, fluorescent lights flickering intermittently and casting dancing shadows on peeling paint. "This is the one with the detector problem," Tony muttered, fumbling through his massive key ring. The metal jingled ominously in the confined space, each clink echoing off the narrow walls like a countdown timer. Mrs. Chun opened the door before they could knock. A tiny woman in her 70s with silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes magnified by thick glasses. Her apartment smelled of jasmine tea and mothballs, with lace curtains filtering the morning light into soft patterns across worn furniture. "Oh, the fire people," she said with a slight accent, her voice carrying decades of life experience. "That terrible beeping, it keeps me awake all night. I try to reach it, but—" Jake watched her gesture toward the ceiling-mounted smoke detector, positioned just high enough to be beyond her reach. In his vision, this device had remained silent as deadly smoke crept through the building, giving the elderly woman no chance to escape. Now, ironically, its malfunction might be the very thing that saved her life if the inspection prompted repairs. If they could prevent the fire from starting in the first place. "We'll take care of that right away, Mrs. Chun," Lieutenant Barnes assured her, setting up his stepladder. "Jake, check the batteries and test the unit." As Jake climbed the ladder, his hand shook violently. The detector was indeed malfunctioning, corroded terminals and dead batteries that should have been replaced months ago. But fixing it felt like playing into fate's hands, like arranging the very tools that destiny would use against them all. "Batteries completely dead," he reported, his voice barely steady. "Corrosion on the terminals, too." "Replace it entirely," Barnes ordered. "Mrs. Chun, you have any problems with your windows? Fire escape accessible?" The elderly woman shuffled toward the window overlooking the eastern fire escape, the same window where Jake had seen her frantically trying to open the latch as flames approached. "Sometimes it sticks," she admitted. "The humidity, makes everything swell up." Jake tested the window mechanism, his heart racing as it opened smoothly under his touch. In his vision, panic and smoke had made the simple task impossible. Now, with calm hands and clear air, the escape route worked perfectly. Perhaps this was how he could cheat death by ensuring every safety measure was in perfect working order, by eliminating the small failures that would compound into catastrophe. They continued their inspection methodically, checking each floor, each apartment, each potential point of failure. The Rodriguez family on the third floor welcomed them warmly, little Maria peeking shyly from behind her mother's legs while clutching the same teddy bear from Jake's Premonition. The toy's button eyes seemed to stare directly at him, as if recognizing him from the vision of smoke and terror. "Everything looks good here," Vaughns concluded as they finished the building inspection. New smoke detectors installed, fire escape cleared of obstructions, exit routes properly marked. "This place is as safe as we can make it." But Jake felt no relief. If anything, the knot in his stomach had tightened further. In trying to prevent the disaster from his vision, had he somehow ensured it would happen? The afternoon sun slanted through grimy windows, and somewhere in the building's depths, he could swear he smelt the faintest hint of smoke. The fire station felt like a refuge as they returned from the inspection, but Jake's unease only intensified. He sat in the day room, mechanically eating lunch while his eyes remained fixed on the emergency radio, waiting for the call that would summon them back to Maple Street. The voices of his fellow firefighters blended into background noise as his mind replayed every detail of the morning's inspection. "You did good work today, rookie," Captain Rodriguez said, settling into the chair beside him with a steaming cup of coffee. Mrs. Chun was singing your praises, said you were the most thorough inspector she'd ever seen. Jake forced a smile, but inside, anxiety gnawed at him like a living thing. Had he been thorough enough? Had he missed something crucial? "Just doing my job, Cap." "That's what I like to hear." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Building safety is the foundation of fire prevention. You prevent the fire, you save the lives. But what if prevention wasn't possible? What if some fires were destined to burn, regardless of human intervention? Jake's fork clattered against his plate as his hands resumed their trembling. Around him, the station buzzed with normal activity apparatus checks, equipment maintenance, the casual banter of men and women who faced danger as a profession. Yet for Jake, every moment felt charged with invisible threat. At 3:47 p.m., his worst fears materialized. The emergency tones pierced the afternoon calm like a knife through fabric. Engine 19, Truck 19, Battalion 7 structure fire, residential building, 428 Maple Street. Multiple residents reported trapped. Jake's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The vision had become reality, exactly as he'd foreseen it. Around him, the station exploded into practiced chaos as firefighters dropped everything and raced for their equipment. Boots pounded on the apparatus floor, engines roared to life, and sirens began their mournful wail. "Morrison! Let's go!" Lieutenant Barnes shouted, but Jake stood frozen in the day room, paralyzed by the certainty of what awaited them. In his mind, he could already see the orange glow painting the windows of 428 Maple, could hear Mrs. Chun's terrified cries, could smell the acrid smoke that would soon claim his own life. The lieutenant's voice cut through his paralysis. "We need every man on this one." Duty overcame fear, and Jake ran for the truck, his turnout gear seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds as he pulled it on. The afternoon air rushed past them as they screamed through the streets, sirens clearing their path while Jake's mind raced faster than the emergency vehicle. This was it, the moment from his vision, the confrontation with destiny he'd been dreading since morning. As they turned onto Maple Street, the building came into view, and Jake's heart nearly stopped. Smoke poured from the second-floor windows, black and thick against the pale afternoon sky. But this wasn't the inferno from his vision, not yet. The fire was smaller, contained to a single apartment, exactly the kind of call they handled routinely. Looks like it started in two barns observed as they pulled up to the scene. Probably contained to one unit if we move fast. Jake stared at the building, confusion warring with relief in his chest. This wasn't the massive fire from his premonition, wasn't the overwhelming disaster that had claimed multiple lives, including his own. But then, why had his vision been so specific, so certain? Why had every detail matched so perfectly if this was just another routine call? As they deployed their equipment and prepared for entry, Jake realized with growing dread that his premonition hadn't shown him the fire's beginning. It had shown him its end. This small fire in Tua was just a spark. Somehow, despite all their morning preparations, despite every safety measure they'd implemented, this routine call would spiral into the catastrophe he'd witnessed. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jake. Inside the building, the smoke was thicker than it appeared from the street. Jake's breathing apparatus hissed rhythmically as he followed Lieutenant Barnes through the second-floor hallway, their powerful flashlights cutting through the gray haze that rolled along the ceiling like an inverted tide. The temperature rose with each step. Sweat already beginning to pool inside his protective gear, despite the building's autumn chill. Primary search. Apartment 2, Barnes's voice crackled through the radio. Morrison, check the bedroom. I'll take the living areas. The apartment layout was simple, a one-bedroom unit with a kitchen that opened into the main living space. The fire had started near the stove, where a forgotten pot of oil had ignited and spread to the surrounding cabinets. Jake could see the progression clearly. Grease fire, spreading to wooden cabinetry, then jumping to curtains and furniture. Textbook kitchen fire, the kind they'd trained for dozens of times. But something felt wrong. The smoke patterns didn't match what he'd expect from a simple grease fire. Dark stains on the walls suggested the blaze had burned much hotter and longer than the timeline indicated. And there was something else, an electrical smell beneath the acrid smoke, sharp and metallic. Barnes, I'm seeing some weird burn patterns in here, Jake reported, examining the kitchen more closely. Behind the stove, electrical wiring had been exposed by the heat, old cloth insulation smoldering against copper conductors. Looks like the fire might have compromised some electrical systems. Copy that. Building's got old wiring throughout, probably installed in the 50s. Let's get this knocked down and get out. They worked efficiently, their hoses creating a protective barrier of water vapor as they attacked the flames at their source. Within 20 minutes, the fire was extinguished, leaving behind the familiar devastation of a structure fire-charred walls, water damage, and the acrid smell that would linger for weeks. Jake felt a moment of relief as they conducted their secondary search, finding no victims, no injuries. Looks like we got lucky, Barnes said as they prepared to leave. Tenant was at work. No one else in the building got hurt. But as they descended to the first floor, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. Near the electrical panel in the basement, water from their firefighting efforts was pooling around exposed conduits. The building's ancient wiring ran through metal pipes that hadn't been properly sealed, and decades of moisture had corroded the connections. Now, with additional water from the fire suppression, electrical current was finding new pathways through the building's infrastructure. Lieutenant, Jake called out, his voice tight with growing panic. We might have a problem down here. Before Barnes could respond, the lights in the building flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but Jake could already smell the distinct odor of electrical fire different from the kitchen blaze they'd just extinguished, sharper and more dangerous. Somewhere in the walls, old wiring was heating up, insulation beginning to smolder in places they couldn't reach. Building-wide electrical fire, Barnes spoke urgently into his radio. All units, we need immediate evacuation of all residents. This fire is spreading through the electrical system. Jake's premonition rushed back with terrifying clarity. This was how it would happen, not from the obvious kitchen fire, but from the hidden electrical fire that would spread unseen through the building's walls. The water they'd used to save one apartment was now feeding a much larger disaster, exactly as fate had planned. As they raced upstairs to begin evacuations, Jake could already hear the first wisps of smoke detectors beginning to sound throughout the building. The new unit he'd installed in Mrs. Chun's apartment would work perfectly, giving her precious seconds to escape if the electrical fire didn't trap her first. The building's old wiring was like a fuse, and they had just lit it. The building became a maze of smoke and confusion as electrical fires bloomed within the walls like deadly flowers. Jake raced up the stairs, his breathing apparatus hissing frantically as he climbed toward the upper floors where residents were trapped by the rapidly spreading blaze. The new fire was different and visible, traveling through conduits and junction boxes, emerging in random locations throughout the structure. 4th floor, apartment 4B. Jake shouted into his radio as he reached Mrs. Chun's hallway. The elderly woman was exactly where his vision had shown her, standing by her window, frantically trying to work the latch that had seized up in the heat and smoke. The jasmine scent of her apartment was now overpowered by the acrid smell of burning insulation. "Mrs. Chen." Jake burst through her door, his powerful flashlight cutting through the gray haze. "We need to get you out now." The woman turned toward him, her thick glasses reflecting his light like mirrors. "The window, I can't open it. The latch is stuck." Jake reached the window in 3 strides, applying pressure to the mechanism he'd tested that morning. But heat had expanded the metal frame, and what had worked smoothly just hours earlier now refused to budge. Panic clawed at his chest as he realized his premonition was playing out exactly as he'd seen it. Every detail matched perfectly: the smoke, the terror, the futile struggle with the window latch. "Come on," he grunted, throwing his full weight against the stubborn window. Behind them, electrical fire was eating through the wall outlets, creating new sources of ignition throughout the apartment. The room was becoming untenable, temperature rising by the second. Finally, the window gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. Cool air rushed in, momentarily clearing the smoke and giving them both a chance to breathe. But as Jake helped Mrs. Chun toward the fire escape, he could see the flames emerging from windows below them. The electrical fire had compromised the building's structural integrity faster than anyone had predicted. "I can't climb down," Mrs. Chun whispered, staring at the steep metal stairs with obvious terror. "My arthritis, my hands won't hold." This too matched his vision perfectly. Jake looked down at the fire escape, its corroded bolts already straining under the building's heat expansion. In his premonition, this was where everything went wrong, where his attempt to save lives would cost him his own. "I'll carry you," he decided, though his training screamed against it. 2 people on the fire escape would double the weight on the already compromised structure. But leaving her behind wasn't an option. As Jake lifted Mrs. Chun in a fireman's carry, the building shuddered around them. Electrical explosions echoed from within the walls as decades-old wiring finally surrendered to the heat. The fire escape creaked ominously under their combined weight, metal groaning in protest. They made it down 1 flight before Jake felt the structure beginning to give way. Bolts that had held for 50 years were pulling loose from heat-weakened brick, and the entire fire escape was starting to separate from the building. Below them, his fellow firefighters had positioned a ladder truck, but they were still too high for a safe jump. "Almost there, Mrs. Chun," Jake lied, feeling the metal platform sway beneath their feet. In his peripheral vision, he could see other residents being evacuated from different parts of the building. The Rodriguez family emerging safely from the main stairwell, other tenants reaching street level without injury. His actions had saved lives, just as he'd hoped. But as they reached the 3rd floor landing, the fire escape finally surrendered to physics and fate. The structure collapsed inward, pulling away from the building in a cascade of twisted metal and shattered brick. Jake's last conscious thought was that he'd managed to cheat destiny, just slightly miss his chun, landed safely on the ladder truck's extended platform, while he fell into darkness. The sirens continued to wail long into the evening, their mournful song mixing with the sounds of rescue operations and the distant crackle of flames being conquered. In the end, the fire had claimed only one life, though it had tried for many more. Sometimes, heroism means accepting the price fate demands, knowing that others will live because of the sacrifice. Death had won again, as it always did. But this time, it had to settle for far less than it had originally planned.